It was early June 1960. The Finnish summer had just begun, and the air was alive with the kind of calm that only Northern Europe can create. A silence so complete, it feels sacred. Four teenagers from the small town of Espoo decided to spend the weekend camping by Lake Bodom, a serene stretch of water nestled between dense pine forests. It was meant to be a brief escape, a chance to laugh, swim, and enjoy the warmth of the season before life inevitably drew them back into the rhythms of school and work. The group was made up of two young couples, Mela Irmeli Björklund, 15, and Anja Tuulikki-Mäki, 15, along with their boyfriends, Seppo Antero Boisman and Niels Wilhelm Gustafsson, 18. All four were bright, healthy, and full of that peculiar invincibility that youth provides, the belief that nothing bad can happen when the sun is shining. They packed simple camping gear. One small green tent, fishing lines, sandwiches, and a few bottles of soda. Seppo brought his motorbike, a sleek blue model that made him the envy of his friends. The ride to Lake Bodom took less than half an hour. Along the way, they passed fields of wildflowers and rows of birch trees. It was the kind of idyllic summer day that could have belonged to any coming-of-age story. If not for what was about to follow, the four teens arrived in the early afternoon. They set up their tent just a few meters from the lake's edge, in a clearing surrounded by tall grass. The air smelled faintly of pine and water and freedom. They swam for a while, splashing and laughing, before lying on the grass to dry in the sun. In a photo taken that day, later recovered from a friend's camera, Mela and Anja are smiling, their hair damp, the lake shimmering behind them. There is nothing in that image to suggest that within 24 hours, 3 of the faces in that picture would be gone forever. As evening settled, the light dimmed slowly. In Finland, summer nights are never fully dark. The sun dips below the horizon, but lingers just enough to paint the sky in shades of blue and gold. The group gathered around a small fire, roasting sausages and listening to the gentle ripple of the lake. Seppo teased Nils about his singing voice. The girls joked about ghosts, local legends of strange shadows seen by the water. They laughed him off. Nearby, unseen in the thickening forest, something or someone might have been watching. The night grew colder. Around midnight, the campfire had burned to embers. The teens zipped up their tent and climbed inside, their belongings scattered just outside. A pair of shoes, a leather jacket, and the motorbike leaning against a tree. What happened next would become one of the greatest mysteries in Finnish criminal history. The morning of June 5th, 1960, was bright and clear. A man named Esko Oiva Johansson, out for a walk with his son, came upon the campsite. From a distance, it looked like an ordinary scene. A tent pitched near the lake, a motorcycle standing nearby. But as they drew closer, Esko noticed something strange. The tent was collapsed, torn in several places, and spattered with what looked like blood. He approached carefully. What he saw would haunt him for the rest of his life. Inside and around the tent were the bodies of 3 of the teenagers, Seppo Boisman, Mela Björklund, and Anja Mäki. Their sleeping bags were soaked in blood. The tent had been slashed open from the outside, as though someone had attacked them through the fabric while they slept. The fourth teen, Niels Gustafsson, was found lying on top of the collapsed tent. Barely alive. His face was covered in blood, his jaw fractured, one side of his face swollen beyond recognition. His shoes were missing. He was the only survivor. When police arrived, they were stunned by the brutality of the scene. The attacker, or attackers, had used both a knife and a blunt object. But what made it truly chilling was the randomness of it all. There were no signs of robbery, no evidence of sexual assault, no clear motive. The tent's entrance flap was still zipped shut. The murderer had sliced through the canvas instead. The investigators also noticed small, puzzling details. Mela's body had been found partially undressed, and her injuries were significantly more violent than the others. Some of the victims' belongings, including wallets, watches, and the car keys, were missing. Nearby, a trail of blood led down to the edge of the lake. It was as though the killer had melted back into the forest, leaving nothing but silence and the faint rustle of the wind over the water. News of the murders spread rapidly through Finland. Within hours, the press descended on the scene. Reporters described it as a nightmare in paradise. Locals gathered at the edge of the lake, whispering theories. A madman on the loose, a jealous lover, maybe even something supernatural. Police cordoned off the area, but it was too late. Dozens of people had already walked through the site, contaminating crucial evidence. Fingerprints were smudged, footprints trampled, cigarette butts and candy wrappers from curious onlookers mixed with those potentially left by the killer. The chaos of that first day would haunt the investigation for decades. Niels Gustafsson, the lone survivor, was rushed to a hospital in Turku. When he awoke, he had no clear memory of the attack. He said the last thing he remembered was hearing a noise outside the tent, a rustling, maybe footsteps, before everything went black. He would later tell police that he had glimpsed a figure in the dark, tall, dressed in black, with bright, glaring eyes. But trauma can distort memory, and no one could be sure whether Niels truly saw the killer, or if his mind had constructed the image afterward. Still, his survival made him both a key witness and, eventually, a suspect. The Bodom Lake murders shook Finland to its core. In 1960, violent crime was rare. Homicides of this kind were almost unheard of. The image of that small green tent, torn open by unimaginable violence, became etched into the national consciousness. Parents forbade their children from camping. Newspapers ran front-page headlines with gruesome speculation. And somewhere, perhaps in that same forest, the killer remained free, watching the chaos unfold, unseen, unknown. The night of June 4th, 1960, began like any other summer night by the lake, calm, blue, and infinite. The surface of Lake Bodom shimmered faintly under a pale moon, and the air carried that soft hum of nature that seems eternal. The whir of insects, the distant croak of frogs, the gentle lapping of water against the shore. In the small green tent pitched near the edge of the lake, Mela, Anya, Seppo, and Nils had fallen asleep, the laughter of the evening still echoing faintly in their dreams. But somewhere in the forest, something or someone was awake. The unseen approach. It might have been around 3 a.m. when the peace of that night was broken. At that hour, the world is halfway between dreams and death, when even the trees seem to hold their breath. But shadow moved between the pines, slow and deliberate. No one saw him. No one ever would. The intruder approached the tent from the side facing the lake, where the ground was soft and left no clear footprints. He carried 2 weapons, a knife, sharp and slender, and a blunt object, possibly a rock or a metal bar. No flashlight, no sound, just purpose. He paused for a long moment beside the tent. Inside, 4 teenagers were asleep, unaware that their laughter would be the last sound they ever made. Then, with a sudden, terrible motion, he struck. The attack. The killer didn't unzip the tent. He slashed straight through the fabric, striking wildly. The first blows were aimed downward, hitting soft bodies in confusion and panic. The screams tore through the still night, but only briefly. Witnesses at a nearby farm would later report hearing something like muffled cries, but assumed it was drunk campers or animals in the forest. Seppo, who was nearest the entrance, tried to get up, but the attacker's shadow fell over him. He was struck in the head with the blunt weapon and collapsed instantly. Mela and Anya tried to crawl toward the tent flap, but their movements tangled in the sleeping bags. The knife came down again and again. When the frenzy was over, 3 of them were motionless. Only Niels Gustafsson, the oldest boy, was still breathing. The killer turned on him next. Niels raised his arm to shield himself, but the blow shattered his jaw and knocked him unconscious. The silence that followed was total. No birds, no footsteps. Just the sound of the lake lapping against the shore, indifferent, eternal. Aftermath at dawn. When the sun rose over Bodom, the scene was almost peaceful again. The tent stood there, collapsed inward, its green canvas stained dark. A pair of sneakers lay on the grass, one turned upside down. The motorbike glimmered faintly in the early light, untouched. At around 6 a.m., a group of fishermen passed by the far side of the lake. One of them thought he saw something strange, what looked like a tent that had fallen flat, but said nothing. It wasn't until 11 a.m., when Esko Johansson and his son came walking through the woods, that the horror was finally discovered. Esko later said that when he saw the blood, his first thought was that a bear had attacked. But there were no claw marks, no torn bags of food, just precision and rage. The first police mistakes. When the police arrived from Espoo, they found chaos. The campsite had already become a spectacle. Curious locals had gathered, stepping over evidence, touching objects, moving bodies. One officer later admitted, "By the time we got there, the crime scene was already gone." Reporters and bystanders picked up cigarette butts, cigarette packs, and even items from the tent as souvenirs. One man claimed to have found a bloodied rock near the site, a crucial clue, but he took it home before police could examine it. Because of these mistakes, the investigation started in confusion, with almost no uncontaminated evidence. The survivor, Niels Gustafsson. At the hospital, Niels regained consciousness 2 days later. His face was broken and swollen, his jaw wired shut, but his eyes Those terrified eyes told a story long before he could speak. When detectives asked what had happened, he hesitated. I don't remember, he said at first. We went to sleep. I heard something outside. I thought it was Seppo. Then, everything went black. He recalled flashes. The sound of slicing fabric. The girls screaming. Blood. The smell of earth and smoke. And a shadow, he said. A man with bright eyes. Was it a real memory? Or trauma rewriting the truth? Nobody knew. Eerie's begin. The Finnish press devoured the case. They called it the Nightmare at Lake Bodom and splashed gruesome headlines across every front page. In a country known for its calm and quiet, the idea that a killer could be lurking in the forests was unbearable. Theories spread fast and wildly. 1. A stranger in the woods. Some believed it was a random drifter, a madman passing through who stumbled on the tent and attacked for no reason. Several locals claimed to have seen a blond man walking near the lake that morning, wearing black, but he was never identified. 2. A revenge killing. Others suggested it was personal, maybe jealousy, betrayal, or rage between the couples. 3. A Soviet spy. Because Finland bordered the Soviet Union, Cold War paranoia added fuel. Perhaps the murders were an act of espionage or part of something darker. 4. Supernatural theories. Among local villagers, some whispered older stories, that the lake was cursed, that it had taken lives before. The name Bodom itself, eerily similar to Bodomus, an old Finnish word for death, only deepened the legend. Mela's body and the killer's message. Among all the grim details, one thing stood out. Mela Bjorklund's injuries. She had been stabbed far more times than the others, as if the killer had singled her out. Some investigators believed it indicated personal rage. And then there was something else, something deeply disturbing. Her body had been moved after death, positioned differently than the others, and her clothes were partly removed. The killer had stayed long enough to do that, but not long enough to be seen. It was as if he wanted to leave behind a message, one that no one would ever fully understand. The missing items. The crime scene was strange for another reason. Nothing valuable was taken. The wallets, watches, even jewelry, all were found inside the tent. But a few items were gone. The keys to Seppo's motorbike. A few pieces of clothing. The victim's shoes. Especially strange were the shoes. Why take them? Footwear doesn't hold value unless the killer wanted to wear them or hide his own tracks. Years later, one of the shoes was found nearly 500 meters from the scene, neatly placed, not thrown. The shadow witness. Weeks after the murders, a man named Pentti Soinin, an ex-convict serving time for unrelated crimes, told police he had overheard something in prison. Another inmate had supposedly confessed to killing those kids at Bodom, but when investigators questioned the alleged confessor, he denied it completely, and Soinin's own story changed each time he told it. It was dismissed as fantasy. Still, whispers about the real killer never stopped. A photograph surfaces. In July 1960, a month after the murders, police released to the press a photograph found at the scene. It showed the group smiling by the lake, carefree, with the tent in the background. The image became iconic, a haunting symbol of innocence lost. But what unsettled people most was the figure faintly visible in the background, standing among the trees. Was it just a shadow? A trick of light? Or had the killer been watching even then? To this day, no one knows. The investigation stalls. By autumn, the investigation had gone cold. Despite hundreds of interviews, police had no suspects. No weapon was ever found. The case files grew thicker, filled with contradictions, dead ends, and guesswork. Meanwhile, Nils Gustafsson tried to rebuild his life. He suffered nightmares, panic attacks, and memory loss. Friends said he would sometimes wake up screaming. But the public, and even some officers, began to wonder, could he have been the killer himself? After all, he was the only one alive. The survivor becomes the suspect. The theory went like this. Nils, jealous or drunk, had argued with the others that night, maybe over Mila, his girlfriend. Things turned violent. He attacked them in a rage, then injured himself to fake survival. But there was a problem. His injuries were too severe to be self-inflicted. The fractured jaw and deep head wound would have left him unconscious. And besides, how could he stab himself through a tent from the outside? Still, the suspicion would haunt him for decades. Silence over the lake. As summer turned to autumn, Lake Bodom grew quiet again. The tourists stopped coming. The laughter was gone. Only the wind remained, whispering through the trees, rippling across the water that had witnessed everything and revealed nothing. Locals said that on certain nights, when the mist hung low over the surface, you could still see the faint outline of a green tent near the shore and hear the echo of laughter fading into screams. The Lake Bodom murders were more than a crime. They were a scar. In the heart of Finland, where silence reigns supreme and violence is rare, the story of 4 teenagers attacked in their sleep by an invisible hand struck the nation like thunder. By late summer 1960, the Finnish police had exhausted every immediate lead. But rumors, dark, persistent rumors, began to take on lives of their own. Who would slaughter sleeping children in such a way? And why leave one of them alive? 1. The survivor under suspicion. From the very start, Nils Wilhelm Gustafsson, the sole survivor, was both pitied and distrusted. He had lived, but he was also the only person who could have possibly done it. Investigators revisited his statements again and again. Each time, the same. We were asleep. I heard something. I woke up. I saw a shadow. Then, nothing. But trauma can erase and distort memory. Or, as some whispered, it can pretend to forget. What made police uneasy were the inconsistencies in his account. He said he had been inside the tent when attacked, yet his own shoes, were found worn and bloody several meters away. If he was unconscious, who had walked in them? When questioned, Nils could not explain. He began to weep. "I don't know," he said. "I swear to God, I don't know." But detectives did not believe in God, only in evidence. The red car. A few days after the murders, a man reported seeing a red Volvo parked on a dirt road near Lake Bodom around 4:30 a.m. Inside were 2 men, one tall, one short, smoking and staring toward the lake. When he approached, they drove away. Police traced every red Volvo in the region. None matched. The witness later admitted he might have been mistaken about the color. Still, The two men in the red car became an early legend, a phantom lead that haunted every investigator afterward. The boot print. On the north side of the tent, officers discovered a single bloody boot print, facing away from the victims. It was a men's size 44, slightly larger than any of the boys wore. At first, this seemed crucial, but later, another investigator noticed the same pattern on Niels's shoes. Had he walked there while confused and bleeding? Or had the killer worn his shoes to frame him, or simply to hide his own tracks? The man in black. One of the eeriest details emerged from a local farmer named Ino Freeman. He lived about a kilometer from the site and told police that early that morning, he saw a tall man dressed entirely in black walking along the road from the lake, calm, silent, with a peculiar gait. He wasn't rushing, Freeman said. He just walked, like someone who had already done what he came to do. No one else saw this man. No one ever identified him, but he became known in Finnish folklore as the Man in Black. For years, children in Espoo would whisper to each other, "If you camp at Bodom, he'll come for you too." 5. The fisherman's testimony. The fishermen who passed the lake at dawn gave conflicting statements. One claimed he saw a tent and something red. Another said he noticed a man sitting on a nearby rock, looking toward the water. When police asked if the man could have been Niels, he hesitated. "No," he said slowly. "This man looked older, but the memory of dawn is treacherous. Shadows deceive. Reflections lie." The police logged it, then moved on. 6. The woman's scream. Two teenage girls living in a farmhouse 2 kilometers away reported hearing a woman screaming around 4 a.m. Their mother told them to go back to bed, thinking it was foxes or partygoers at the lake. The scream stopped minutes later. That timing, between 3:45 and 4:15 a.m., would become critical. It was the window of death. 7. The years of silence. As the investigation grew cold, time began to bury the truth under layers of confusion. The police had no murder weapon, no clear motive, no usable fingerprints, only fragments, and a lingering, spectral presence over Lake Bodom. By the mid-1960s, the case had faded into a grim legend. Parents warned their children not to camp near lakes. Couples who visited Bodom left before dark. Every so often, new confessions surfaced. In 1969, a man already in prison for murder claimed to be the killer. He described details that sounded convincing until investigators realized those details had been published in newspapers years earlier. False confessions became part of the case's curse. The man named Pentti. In 1972, police re-examined the testimony of Pentti Soininen, the petty criminal who had claimed that another inmate had confessed. When investigators finally confronted him again, he had a different story. This time, he said he himself had done it. But before police could verify his confession, Soininen hanged himself in his cell. He left behind a note. It read, "I did what they say. I cannot live with it anymore." But once again, inconsistencies emerged. He could not have been near Espoo that night. Witnesses placed him in Turku, 150 kilometers away. The confession was discarded. Still, Journalists began to call him the Ghost of Bodom. Every time the story appeared in print, the legend of Lake Bodom grew darker. The 2004 breakthrough. Decades later, when most had given up hope, Finnish authorities reopened the case in 2004 using modern forensic methods. DNA testing had advanced. Old evidence was re-examined: bloodstains, hair samples, fibers from the tent. And what they found shocked everyone. The blood patterns suggested that Nils Gustafsson's version of events could not be true. Experts claimed he had likely been the aggressor, not the victim. A forensic psychologist even testified that his survivor's memory gaps might indicate guilt. On March 6, 2004, Nils was arrested. More than 44 years after the murders, the nation was stunned. 10. The trial. When the trial began in 2005, it was the most watched court case in Finnish history. Now an elderly man, Nils appeared in court, limping slightly, his jaw still crooked from the fracture of 1960. The prosecution argued that he had fought with Seppo that night, perhaps over Mila, and that jealousy had turned into rage. After killing the others, he supposedly staged the scene to look like an external attack, even injuring himself in the process. The defense countered fiercely. His injuries were too severe to be self-inflicted. No murder weapon had ever been found. No blood matching the other victims was discovered on his clothing. They also pointed out that Nils had never changed his story, despite years of torment. The jury deliberated for 4 days. On October 7, 2005, the verdict came: not guilty. The courtroom erupted in silence, the kind of silence heavier than noise. Nils broke down in tears. He had waited 45 years to hear those words. And yet, the acquittal did not bring peace. 11. The haunting of a nation. Even after his release, public opinion remained divided. Some believed he was innocent, a victim of fate, chosen by chance to survive. Others whispered that he had fooled them all. The truth, as always, slipped beneath the surface, like a body sinking in dark water. Today, if you visit Lake Bodom, you'll find it tranquil. Families picnic by the shore. Children swim. But when night falls, locals say the air changes. The wind grows colder, heavier, as if carrying old cries from the trees. There's a plaque near the site now. Small, simple, with 4 names etched in Finnish granite. Tourists take photos. No one stays long, because every ripple on that lake seems to murmur the same words. He was there. He's still there. 12. What remains unsolved despite the decades? 3 major mysteries still remain. 1. The missing items. The killer took shoes, clothes, and a few keys, items that never resurfaced. Why? 2. The shadow in the photograph. The faint figure behind the teens remains unexplained. Was it coincidence, or the killer captured forever in the background? 3. The true motive. Love? Revenge? Madness? Or simply random, senseless evil? No theory satisfies them all. 13. The legend endures. Lake Bodom has become part of Finland's cultural mythology. A heavy metal band even took its name, Children of Bodom, in tribute to the tragedy. In interviews, the band's singer once said, "We didn't want to exploit it. We wanted people to remember it, the mystery, the fear." Even now, 65 years later, the lake draws true crime enthusiasts, ghost hunters, and the curious. They bring cameras, drones, and thermal sensors. But nothing ever shows up. Just mist, just silence, just the eternal reflection of that terrible night in 1960. And as you stand there, with the pines whispering above you and the water dark beneath, it's impossible not to feel watched. Because maybe someone never left. 1. A return after decades. It's a misty morning in 2020. Drone footage glides over Lake Bodom. Still, quiet, unnervingly peaceful. The same place where 60 years earlier, 4 teenagers camped on this very shore and vanished into legend. Now moss covers the scars of time. The trees have thickened, their roots crawling toward the water like veins. Yet locals say the ground remembers. Each year, a few brave souls return. Journalists, true crime podcasters, even retired police officers, drawn by the same unsolved question. Who really killed the Bodom campers? The new evidence. In 2019, a small Finnish crime documentary uncovered a sealed police folder marked Supplementary Materials, Unreleased. Inside were a few forgotten items, a photograph of a knife wound pattern traced in chalk, a map drawn by an investigator with the word possible path circled in red, and, most intriguingly, a DNA sample labeled unknown male. The DNA was partial, too degraded for clear identification, but not from any of the victims. This detail reignited interest across Finland. Could it belong to the real killer? Or was it simply contamination from decades of handling? Forensics experts disagreed. The case was once again officially labeled unsolved. The survivor's silence. By the 2010s, Niels Gustafsson had stopped giving interviews. He lived quietly in a small village, refusing to speak of Lake Bodom. When approached by a reporter from Helsingin Sanomat, he simply said, "Some things are better left where they happened." He died in 2020, at the age of 79, taking with him every unspoken memory of that night. At his funeral, a single candle was placed beside his coffin. On it, someone had written one word: forgiven. The lost reels. In 2021, a group of university film students researching Finnish folklore stumbled upon 8mm footage labeled Bodom, 1960s. The reel had been kept in a private archive belonging to a retired police photographer. The footage was haunting. Short clips of the investigation site. The tent shredded, the lake eerily calm. But one frame, in particular, froze everyone. A blurry silhouette at the tree line. Broad shoulders, long coat. The figure looked directly at the camera. Was it just an officer, a bystander, or the man in black that locals swore they saw walking away that morning? The frame was too degraded to confirm. But for those who watched, it felt like staring straight into the ghost of 1960. 5. The theories that refuse to die. Over the years, 5 major theories have tried and failed to explain the Lake Bodom mystery. Theory 1. The survivor did it. The official police stance for years. But there's one issue. His physical injuries, especially the jaw fracture, matched patterns consistent with external blunt trauma, not self-infliction. Forensic pathologists today argue he couldn't have faked that level of damage. Still, skeptics say Maybe he didn't mean to kill them all. Maybe it was a fight gone wrong. ... Theory 2. A random drifter. In post-war Finland, vagrants and drifters often passed through Espoo. Could one have stumbled on the campsite? Some locals claim a stranger was seen sleeping in barns nearby days before. He disappeared right after the murders. But no one ever identified him or proved he existed. Theory 3. Revenge or jealousy. Several locals speculated that someone from the teen's social circle, perhaps an ex-boyfriend or rival, had followed them. But again, no motive or name ever surfaced. Theory 4. Military experiment gone wrong. A bizarre but persistent rumor that the campers saw something they weren't meant to see. Finland's Cold War proximity to the Soviet border fueled endless speculation. Secret tests, soldiers, or even espionage. No evidence supports it, yet it remains one of the most talked about online theories. Theory 5. The Man in Black. For many Finns, he is the only explanation that fits emotionally, if not logically. ... A nameless, faceless evil that came out of the forest that night and vanished forever. He appears in songs, poems, even urban legends told to children. Some say he was death itself. 6. A modern pilgrimage. Today, true crime fans and amateur investigators make pilgrimages to Lake Bodom. Some bring flowers, others tape recorders, hoping to capture voices of the dead. YouTube channels post eerie overnight videos titled "Sleeping at Bodom" or "We Heard Something in the Woods." The algorithm rewards fear. At night, fog rolls in low and thick, blanketing the lake like a veil. Locals say if you walk close enough to the water, you'll hear soft splashing, as though someone is still crawling out. The silence beneath the water. Divers have explored the lake dozens of times. Each time, sonar reveals strange shapes, metallic debris, old fishing equipment, the occasional bicycle. But in 2016, one diver reported finding a rusted pocket knife lodged deep in the silt. The blade had long corroded, but when analyzed, faint traces of blood residue were detected. Unfortunately, it was too old to match any DNA profile. Still, it sent ripples through the Finnish media. The lake keeps its secrets. The music of the dead. In 1997, a Finnish metal band named Children of Bodom released their debut album. Their name and their sound were directly inspired by the murders. When asked if they believed in the legend, their lead singer replied, "Every Finn grows up hearing it. You don't have to believe it to feel it." Ironically, years later, that very singer, Aleksi Laiho, died young and mysteriously, reigniting online whispers of the Bodom curse. The unending shadow. The most chilling detail about Lake Bodom isn't the crime itself, it's the pattern of fear it left behind. Every few decades, someone new claims to see the shadows again. A camper in 1986 swore he saw figures standing near the shore. A woman walking her dog in 2002 said she heard screams beneath the wind. In 2018, a man fishing at dawn found 3 stones stacked near the water, each carved with initials M, S, and A. Authorities dismiss these as hoaxes, but for those who know the story, the mere possibility feels enough. 10. The weight of unanswered questions. The Bodom murders endure not because of gore, but because of ambiguity. Every piece of evidence contradicts another. Every theory has a hole. If the killer was human, he's long dead. If the evil was something else, maybe it never left. To this day, the Finnish National Bureau of Investigation still lists the case as open, unsolved. A cold file that refuses to fade. The Last Campfire. One summer evening in 2022, a journalist returned to Bodom with a small camera and a tent. He camped at the very spot where the murders took place. As night fell, he recorded a short monologue. "I don't believe in ghosts. I believe in memory. And memory, when it's dark enough, becomes haunting." Around 3:30 a.m., his camera caught something. The tent rustled slightly, as if brushed by a hand from outside. No one appeared, but his audio recorder picked up faint breathing and a whisper in Finnish. "Why did you leave us?" The journalist packed up and left before sunrise. He never went back. Legacy of fear. Lake Bodom has become more than a crime scene. It's a mirror of human curiosity. We need answers. We crave resolution. But sometimes, truth is not what we want. It's what we can't accept. In the decades since, hundreds have tried to tell the story, each version reflecting their own fear, guilt, or obsession. And maybe that's what makes it immortal. Because the real horror isn't what happened that night. It's not knowing why. In the stillness of the Finnish woods, evil doesn't roar. It whispers. 1. A nation that never slept again. When the sun rose over Espoo on June 6, 1960, Finland was never the same. Before that day, the country was known for its silence, its lakes, its forests, its solitude. But after the Bodom murders, silence itself became suspicious. For months, newspapers filled their front pages with gruesome theories. Families stopped letting their children camp outdoors. Fishermen claimed to see ghosts drifting across the misty lake surface at dawn. The tragedy cracked something deep within the Finnish psyche, the feeling that their remote, peaceful homeland could protect them. Because now, everyone knew. Even in paradise, horror could find you in your sleep. 2. The Finnish fear. Parents warn their children. Never sleep near the woods. Don't trust the dark water. Campsites were left empty for years. And to this day, some locals swear they still won't swim in Lake Bodom after sunset. The transformation of evil. Before Bodom, crime in Finland was thought to be rational, born of drunken fights or domestic disputes. After Bodom, something changed. For the first time, people began speaking of evil without motive. Violence that made no sense, no reason, no face. It became an idea, a presence. Writers began to explore it. In 1963, the Finnish author Kari Lehtinen published The Shadows over Bodom, a short story inspired by the murders. It described a figure moving silently through fog, neither ghost nor man, but something in between. The book became a quiet cult hit. People read it not for answers, but to feel less alone in their fear. 4. The police haunted by guilt. Inside the Finnish police archives, there's a handwritten note from Inspector Paavo Kallio, the original case investigator. It reads, "We followed every lead, but the lake swallows more than just water." Kallio retired in 1972, still tormented by his failure. His colleagues said he would often visit the Bodom crime scene every June, standing by the shore with a small notebook, staring across the still water. One officer later recalled, "He spoke as if the lake was listening." 5. The survivor's shadow. Even after his acquittal, Nils Gustafsson could never escape the whispers. For some, he was an innocent man who endured unimaginable trauma. For others, he was the killer who got away with it. In his final interview, he said, "People think they want the truth, but they don't. The truth is heavier than guilt." When he died, a few journalists revisited his home. Among his belongings, they found a photograph, black and white, folded at the corners, of the 4 friends together at Bodom, smiling. On the back, he had written just one word: sorry. 6. The curse in pop culture. By the late 1990s, Lake Bodom had transformed into a symbol, a fusion of fear, fascination, and art. The band Children of Bodom turned the tragedy into a legend. Their logo, shaped like a scythe, became globally recognized. Fans from across the world traveled to Espoo to see the lake that birthed the myth. Local authorities hated it. They called it dark tourism. But for a new generation, it was the first time the story felt alive again. You could almost say the lake had found its voice. 7. The new generation of truth seekers. The internet gave the case new life. In the 2000s, online forums exploded with theories, photographs, and alleged confessions. Reddit threads, YouTube documentaries, even TikTok clips revived the story with eerie reenactments and ghostly sound design. But something strange happened. The further the story spread, the less it was about the truth and more about the feeling of mystery. People didn't want answers anymore. They wanted the chill, the echo, the story that keeps you awake. 8. The dark tourism phenomenon. Every summer now, Lake Bodom sees small waves of visitors. They come quietly. Couples, filmmakers, paranormal vloggers. Some bring candles, others just cameras. There's a small trail that leads down to the water, where the campers once pitched their tent. A wooden cross still stands there, unmarked, weathered by time. A few feet away, someone has carved a single word into the bark of a tree. Remember. The area is now technically restricted at night, but those who sneak in describe an atmosphere that feels charged. The sound of water lapping the shore, the occasional crack of a branch, and sometimes a faint echo of laughter carried by the wind. Whether real or imagined, no one forgets it. 9. Echoes through generations. Children born decades after 1960 still grow up hearing the story. Their parents tell them in whispers as a warning, part ghost story, part history lesson. And even if they don't believe it, they feel it, because every Finn deep down carries a sliver of Lake Bodom within them. That quiet dread of something watching from the woods. Schools teach about it now in criminology courses. Documentaries continue to retell it, and every few years, a new book or podcast claims to have the answer. But none ever do, because the story isn't just about who died. It's about who keeps remembering. The final reflection. In 2023, a small memorial was erected by the lake, 4 stones, each engraved with a name. Mela, Anya, Seppo, and Nils. It wasn't built by the government or even by family, but by local teenagers who'd grown up hearing the story. On the plaque below, they wrote, "We never knew you, but you never left us." As the sun sets behind the birch trees, the water glows gold for a moment, then darkens to black. The reflection of the forest trembles on the surface, like the memory of something breathing beneath. And in that silence, you can almost hear the whisper again. Sleep tight, if you can. The Unbroken Circle. The Lake Bodom murders remain one of Europe's most enduring mysteries. No confessions, no closure. Just the echo of unanswered questions rippling through time. Every few decades, the same story returns, retold, reimagined, reborn. A cycle of curiosity, fear, and fascination. Maybe that's what keeps it alive, because as long as people tell the story, the lake never sleeps. Some lakes reflect the sky. Bodom reflects what hides beneath it.